Going to talk about remainders. A remainder always follows a life estate. There are two main kinds of remainders. A remainder can be vested or a remainder can be contingent. And then there's some twists for a vested remainder because a vested remainder can be subject to open or subject to divestment. But first we'll just talk about what a vested remainder is and what a contingent remainder is, and then we'll add details. So what makes a vested remainder? What makes a remainder vested? If a remainder has at least one potential taker is an identified actual person, then a remainder is vested. And there has to be no condition that must be satisfied other than, of course, the end of the life estate. So the example would be to A for life, then to B. We know who B is. B is a person named Betty or Bernard or whatever. And there's no condition that B has to fulfill in order to receive the remainder. B just waits for A's life estate to end, and then B takes the remainder in fee simple. This is a vested remainder. Now, note, vested does not mean immediately possessory. During A's life, B has no immediate right to possess the property, but what B has is a guarantee that upon A's death, B's vested remainder will become possessory. So if we go back to our lovely drawing that I've been making of an arrow representing ownership over the time, if via valid will O leaves Blackacre to A for life, then to B, then what that creates is a life estate for A and then a remainder in B. That remainder is vested because B is an identified person and B does not have to fulfill any condition before being able to take the property. B simply waits for A to die and then B's remainder becomes possessory. Just a tip as you go through these problems, if you are trying to figure out who has what estate, start at the beginning of the grant, identify the first estate that was created. In this case, it's a life estate to A for life. Then identify the next subsequent grant, and if there are more, keep going in order. Okay, so every time you have a life estate, what will follow it will be a remainder of some kind. Okay, so here's a problem that highlights the difference between a vested remainder and a contingent remainder. A conveys to A for life, and in the event of A's death, to B and her heirs. So we start, what does A have? We start at the beginning. A has a life estate. That means whatever follows has to be a remainder. Once we know it's a remainder, the question is it a vested remainder or is it a contingent remainder? As written, this grant seems like it might be a little ambiguous because as it's written, in the event of A's death to B and her heirs, it seems to suggest that B has to fulfill a condition. But because every holder of a life estate is going to die, and all this really says is to A for life, and then when A dies, it goes to B, this actually creates a vested remainder in B. And I'll just take a moment to point out that the language to B and her heirs simply signals that this is a fee simple absolute and does not create any interest in whomever B's heirs might be. So if we look at the options for what interests are created by this grant, number one, a life estate in A, a vested remainder in B. Number two, a life estate in A, a contingent remainder in B. Or three, life estate in A, contingent remainder in B, reversion in O. The correct answer is 1. This grant creates a life estate in A and a vested remainder in B because B is an identified person and B does not have to fulfill any condition to take this grant. B simply takes after the life estate ends.